Go home immediately. We have a talk." Andrei's voice on the phone sounded like nothing Nadezhda had heard in 30 years. There was no anger in it, rather a nakedness, as if his usual mask of benevolent grump had been ripped away. Nadezhda placed the receiver on the reception desk and stared at it for a few moments, as if expecting a bite. Half an hour before, Lena, the snob, had called her, screaming something about Kostya, about the hospital, about some nasty thing that had hit him in the face. "We just wanted to celebrate at the dacha, nothing special, and there's some kind of trap there, Nadezhda." "Have you gone completely crazy in your old age?" Nadezhda listened and thought of one thing. It worked. She had traveled across the city in a minibus because she had never had her own car. Andrei had the car, and she had the dacha. That's how they divided things up at the very beginning, and it seemed fair. Now, fairness looked different. Parked at the entrance was that same beige Niva Tamara had driven, the one her mother-in-law had driven every summer to boss her around. "It's crooked here, fix it. Why aren't the tomatoes tied up? The fence needs to be further to the left." In 30 years, Nadezhda had never snapped back, never once said that this was her dacha, her land, her apple trees. She was a good wife, a patient daughter-in-law, but at heart, a fool. Andrei opened the door first, not waiting for the elevator. She could see his back on the stairs. Tamara followed, dragging her swollen legs. Nadezhda was the last to climb, and with each step something within her unraveled. Something cold, calm, something he hadn't known within himself before. They entered the apartment and paused in the threshold. The television was on. Nadezhda had programmed it to turn on a timer. It turned out to be easy. Her niece taught her in 5 minutes. On the screen was the country bedroom, the one with the patchwork quilt Nadezhda had sewn herself. Andrei lay on the quilt, and on top of him was a woman with long nails and dyed hair. They didn't speak. They had no time for conversation. Andrei rushed to the television, grabbed the cord, and pulled. The screen didn't turn off. Nadezhda had specially bought a model with a built-in battery. The salesman was surprised why a pensioner needed such technology. "For reliability," she replied. "For reliability." The picture changed. Now the screen showed a kitchen, also a country house, with a red polka dot oilcloth. Tamara stood by the window talking on the phone. Her voice was clear. Nadezhda had invested in good microphones. "Soon this goat will die, and everything will be ours. Do you hear, Lena? Everything will be ours. Andreyusha has already made arrangements with the notary." Tamara let out a sound like a sob and began to sag. She didn't fall, but grabbed the doorframe. Her legs buckled, and she remained standing, bent over as if she'd been punched in the gut. Nadezhda entered the room, walked around her mother-in-law, and sat down in the chair, her own chair by the floor lamp, where she'd spent 30 years reading medical journals while Andrei watched football. She watched the screen with them. Another recording was already playing. Andrei and the woman on the veranda. They were drinking liqueur from her cans and laughing about something. A year ago, their neighbor Liuda called her to the fence. Liuda's voice was guilty. She crumpled her apron and didn't make eye contact. "Nadia, there was some dyed one of yours. I thought you knew, maybe some relative." Nadezhda said, "Thank you," and went home. That evening, for the first time in 30 years, she cried in the bathroom, covering her mouth with a towel so Andrei wouldn't hear from the room. He watched football. He always watched football. The next day, she ordered cameras, small Chinese ones with memory card recording. Her hands shook as she set them up. Her face was calm. Tamara suddenly fell to her knees, really fell heavily with a dull thud, and crawled to the chair. She grabbed Nadezhda by the hem of her skirt. "Daughter, forgive me, the devil made me do it. My dear daughter, I was like a mother to you." Nadezhda looked at the top of her head, at the gray roots under the red dye, and felt nothing. Andrei finally got over his stupor. "This is a provocation," he screamed. "It's your own fault. You were cold. You didn't take care of yourself. You didn't give me money for my needs. I put up with it for 30 years. 30 years. He stepped toward her, and Nadezhda saw that he was crying, not from shame, but from anger. The phone in her bag rang. She took it out and looked at the screen. The hospital. Kostya demands that she come and answer for self-harm. He opened the safe without a key, got a stream of pepper spray in the face, but not before he managed to insert a flash drive into his laptop. He wanted to copy documents for the dacha. The laptop automatically uploaded all the files to the cloud. Now the recordings were everywhere. Nadezhda hung up and pulled a folder out of her bag. She'd been carrying it with her for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. A divorce petition, a claim for emotional distress, a police report for breaking and entering her dacha. She placed it on the table in front of her husband, carefully, neatly, like a medical record. Andrei grabbed the folder and threw it on the floor. The pages scattered across the room. You're not going anywhere. 30 years together. So I won't let you go. Do you hear me? I won't let you go. Nadezhda stood up, gathered the documents, straightened each sheet, looked at her husband, and uttered her first words of the evening. I spent 30 years building this dacha. You spent 30 years taking your mother there. 1 year you took your whore there, and now you're going to yell at me. The voice was even, not a single tremor. Tamara was still kneeling. She hissed at her son without raising her head. Shut up, you idiot. She didn't show you everything. There's something else there. I know. There. Kostya spoke. She stopped herself. She covered her mouth with her hand. Nadezhda smiled slowly. The roar woke her at 7 in the morning. Nadezhda opened her eyes and for a few seconds couldn't understand where she was and what was happening. Then she saw Andrei, who was pulling her things out of the closet and throwing them into an open suitcase. Underwear, a dress, an old robe she wore on duty. Everything flew in a lump indiscriminately. This is my apartment, too. Andrei didn't even turn to her. You don't like it? Go to your sister. We'll see how you cope without a Moscow residence permit. He grabbed her winter boots and threw them into the hallway. Nadezhda heard them hit the walls. She stood up, threw a sweater over her nightgown, and went out into the hallway. Her suitcase was already standing outside the threshold. Her boots and a bag with some things lay nearby. A neighbor from the 3rd floor looked out at the noise, saw Nadezhda, and quickly slammed the door. She didn't want to interfere. No one ever wanted to interfere. An hour later, the local police officer arrived, Seryoga, Andrei's former classmate. They used to play football together in the yard. Now Seryoga wore a uniform that barely fit at the stomach and looked at Nadezhda with that special expression she knew well from work. That's how they look at patients who are to blame for their own illnesses. Nat, well, maybe you can make peace? Seryoga threw up his hands and glanced sideways at Andrei. Andreyuka says, did you set traps at the dacha? The man was injured. That's a crime, you understand. Nadezhda silently pulled the security system contract out of her bag. It's all legal. Self-defense. There was a warning on the safe door. She put it up herself. Seryoga grumbled over the papers and scratched his head. Well, that's for the judge to sort out. What about me? I didn't care. It's a family matter. He left, and Andrei slammed the door behind him, looking as if he'd won. Nadezhda realized she couldn't stay in the apartment any longer. Lena was waiting for her at work. The guard stood right in the clinic's hallway next to the reception desk, and her voice carried throughout the 1st floor. You crippled my brother. Kostya will go blind. We'll sue you, do you hear? We'll sue you. The patients in line turned their heads. Nurse Olya peeked out from the procedure room and immediately hid back. The head doctor called Nadezhda to his office. He sat at his desk, rubbing the bridge of his nose and not looking her in the eye. Nadezhda Vasilyevna, you understand. The institution, the reputation. Maybe you should take a vacation until retirement. There are only 2 weeks left. Nadezhda nodded. She understood. She always understood everything. That evening, she was sitting in her friend Zina's apartment sorting through documents. Zina went on night duty, left the keys, and said, "Live as long as you need to." They had worked together for 20 years. Zina knew everything, almost everything. In the box Nadezhda had managed to take from the apartment, there was an old will. 20 years ago, Tamara had persuaded her to sign the dacha over to Andrei. "So that the children will have it, my dear. You never know what might happen to you, and Andreyusha will take care of the property." The children never materialized. The will remained. Nadezhda pulled another will from the same box, a new will drawn up a month earlier at a notary's office. Everything went to her niece, Katya, her sister's daughter. Katya was finishing medical school and wanted to become a surgeon. Katya had never once asked Nadezhda for money. The next day, a summons arrived. Andrei had filed a counterclaim. He demanded that the dacha be divided as jointly acquired property. He claimed he had contributed money from the family budget to the construction, renovations, and landscaping. His lawyer, a certain Viktor Pavlovich, scheduled the trial for January 12th. Nadezhda recalled building the veranda. Alone, after working 24-hour shifts, she'd buy boards with her salary and arrange for a neighbor to help her deliver them on a cart. Andrei was watching football at the time. Tamara would arrive and command, "It's crooked here. Redo it. Why are the boards the wrong color?" Not once in 30 years had anyone said thank you. Kostya recorded a video from the hospital. Lena posted it on social media with the caption, "We demand justice." In the recording, Kostya sat on his bed wearing dark glasses and spoke into the camera in a trembling voice. "This woman gassed me. My cornea is damaged. I could go blind." She did it on purpose. Hundreds of comments followed the video. Half of them demanded that Nadezhda be jailed. The other half wondered what he was doing in a strange house. The neighbors in the entryway started whispering. Nadezhda heard snatches of conversation when she came to pick up the remaining things. They say she burned his eyes out. They say she's crazy. They say he beat her. So she got revenge. She came to the apartment in the evening when she thought Andrei was on shift. She inserted the key into the lock. The key didn't fit. She tried again, then realized the locks had been changed. Andrei spoke to her through the door. His voice was cheerful, almost festive. "Stay with your sister since you're so smart. We'll see who wins. The trial is in a week. Do you think your papers will help you?" Nadezhda stood in the stairwell. She was holding a bag with documents and a phone. Nothing else. The neighbor peeked out again and slammed the door again. The landing smelled of strange food and cat food. Her phone vibrated, a message from an unfamiliar number. "Nadezhda Vasilievna. This is Marina, the one. We need to talk. I have something to tell you, too." Nadezhda read the message 3 times, then slowly typed out a reply. "Tomorrow, the cafe on Pushkinskaya at 2 o'clock." She walked down the stairs and outside. It was cold, late December. Snow crunched underfoot. Music was playing somewhere. Someone was already celebrating New Year's. Nadezhda walked to the bus stop, thinking about how her husband's mistress wanted to meet her and how this meeting could change everything. Marina turned out to be completely different from what Nadezhda had imagined. No long nails, no flashy hair dye. Across from her, in a cheap cafe on Pushkinskaya, sat a tired woman of about 40, with dark circles under her eyes and shaking hands. She was crying, wiping tears from her cheeks with a paper napkin. He never promised a divorce. He promised for 3 years, and then I found out he was cheating on me, too. With my younger sister, can you imagine? With Olya. She came to visit me, and he gave her rides on his bus after his shift. Nadezhda was silent. She'd come here with one goal, to look into the eyes of the woman who'd ruined her life, but instead she saw another victim, just as deceived, just as used, only younger and more stupid. Marina's words trailed off as she spoke. Andrei had met her on the bus 3 years ago. She was going to visit her ailing mother in the suburbs. He was driving. They struck up a conversation. He seemed so attentive, so caring. He said his wife was a tyrant who wouldn't let him live, that she was cold, greedy, obsessed with her dacha, that he dreamed of a real family, of children, of love. He showed me photos of the dacha. Marina took out her phone and scrolled through the gallery. "Look," he said, "it will soon be ours. We'll live there and raise our children. I gave him $200,000 to repair the roof. He said it was leaking and needed to be sealed immediately." Nadezhda looked at the photograph of her veranda, her apple trees, her porch, which she painted every spring. She had re-roofed it herself 5 years ago. There had been no repairs. Did his mother know? Nadezhda asked, although she already knew the answer. Marina nodded, and something like shame flickered in her eyes. "Tamara Sergeyevna told me, 'You're right for him. You're obedient, not like that nurse. Give birth to him quickly, before it's too late.' She gave me tea at that very dacha while you were at work." Nadezhda imagined the picture. Tamara in the kitchen with a red polka dot oilcloth, Marina across from her, both drinking tea from her cups, eating jam from her jars, discussing how they would live after her death. This goat will die soon. She remembered the recording and felt something inside her turn to stone. "I couldn't get pregnant." Marina burst into tears again. "I tried for 2 years. The doctors said I have health problems and need treatment." But Tamara Sergeyevna immediately cooled off, stopped calling, stopped inviting me. Andrei changed too, became rude and impatient. And then I saw him with Olya. They sat in the cafe for 3 hours. Nadezhda listened and thought about how strange life works. She'd hated this woman for a whole year, imagining how she'd meet her, what she'd say, how she'd destroy her with a single glance. And now she sat across from her and felt only fatigue and something akin to pity. The next day, they went to the police together. Nadezhda reported breaking into the dacha and damaging property. Marina reported fraud. 200,000 rubles transferred to Andrei's card. Correspondence with promises of a shared future. Photos of the dacha he'd passed off as his own. The investigator, a young man, looked tiredly at the 2 women, then at the mountain of documents, then back at them. "Let's take this in order," he finally said. "You're the wife, you're the mistress, and you both came together." Nadezhda nodded. The investigator sighed heavily and pulled out a blank form. While they waited in the hallway, Nadezhda reminisced. The veranda at the dacha she'd built alone, the boards bought with her salary, the nails she'd hammered in after 24-hour shifts, her hands shaking from fatigue. Andrei, meanwhile, was watching football in the room. Tamara would arrive and command, "It's crooked here. Redo it. Why are the boards the wrong color?" The fence needed to be to the left. Andrei learned of his wife and mistress's union the next day. A neighbor saw them together at the police station and called Lena. Lena called her brother. He found them in the same cafe on Pushkinskaya Street, where they had agreed to meet again to discuss their pre-trial strategy. The cafe door swung open with a bang. Andrei stood in the doorway, red-faced and contorted. "You're both crazy," he yelled at the entire room. "I'll have you both locked up in a mental hospital. You," he pointed his finger at Marina, "who was the one who was trying to get into my life? And you?" He turned to Nadezhda. "You old fool who's ruined my whole life." The cafe patrons froze. The waitress behind the counter reached for the phone. Andrei grabbed a chair and threw it toward the display case. The glass shattered with a deafening crash. Marina screamed and covered her face with her hands. Nadezhda didn't move. The police arrived 7 minutes later. They restrained Andrei right there at the counter. He struggled and shouted something about a conspiracy, about being set up, about not letting it go. Nadezhda watched him being led away and felt nothing at all. At the station, Andrei demanded to call his mother. Tamara rushed in half an hour later, burst into the duty station, and started yelling at the duty officer. "Let my son go. This is all her fault. She drove him to it. This woman is a criminal. She crippled my nephew. She drove my husband to a nervous breakdown." The The duty officer, an elderly man with a gray mustache, silently turned on the cafe's camera. Andre throws a chair. Andre smashes a display case. Andre yells at two women who are simply sitting at a table. "This is an administrative offense, citizen," the duty officer said. "Or maybe hooliganism, damage to property, threats, disturbing the peace. He'll sit there until the morning, and then we'll sort it out." Tamara turned pale and clutched her heart. Nadezhda left the station without looking back. That evening, as she sat in Zina's apartment drinking tea, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she recognized the voice immediately. Cold, official, with a metallic tone. "Nadezhda Vasilyevna, we have a witness who will testify that you systematically abused your husband, that the dacha was bought with his money, that you intentionally injured his brother. 3 days until the trial. Think carefully." Nadezhda listened and realized it wasn't a lawyer. Lawyers don't talk like that. Lawyers don't call in the evening with threats. It was Tamara. Her mother-in-law changed her voice, but the intonation remained the same, commanding, peremptory. The same ones that she used to say for 30 years, "It's crooked here, redo it." Nadezhda hung up and looked at the folder of documents. 3 days until the trial. 3 days to prepare for the final battle. She took out her phone and dialed Marina's number. "We need to talk. I have an idea for tomorrow." The courtroom was smaller than Nadezhda had imagined. 3 rows of wooden benches, the judge's table on a raised platform, a flag in the corner. She arrived half an hour before the start, sat in the last row, and waited. Her hands didn't shake. She was surprised by the calm that came from somewhere within, from a place where previously only fear had resided. Tamara had brought a whole delegation, neighbors, distant relatives, 3 women from the church choir where her mother-in-law sang on Sundays. They sat down on the front benches, turned around and looked at Nadezhda as if she'd killed someone. One of the singers, a plump woman in a headscarf, demonstratively crossed herself. Kostya appeared in the front row. Lena was leading him by the arm, though he could see the way perfectly well. He wore dark glasses and a cane that he tapped on the floor. This entire performance was designed for the judge. Nadezhda watched and thought that in 30 years of working at the clinic, she'd learned to distinguish real pain from feigned pain. Kostya was faking it poorly. Andre entered last, along with his lawyer. Nadezhda recognized him immediately, although she'd only seen him in a photo on Marina's phone. Viktor Pavlovich, the husband of the same younger sister with whom Andre had been having an affair behind his mistress's back, tall, imposing, with cold eyes. He looked at Nadezhda appraisingly, as if she were an adversary he was about to destroy. Dina, her lawyer, sat down next to Nadezhda, a young woman in her early 30s with a short haircut and an attentive gaze. Marina had recommended her. They had once gone to school together. Dina took the case for free. She said, "I'm interested." Nadezhda didn't ask what exactly she was interested in. Perhaps justice. Perhaps just good material for a portfolio. The judge entered at precisely 10 o'clock. A woman of about 50, with a tired face and a gray streak in her dark hair. She sat down, opened a folder, and looked at the courtroom over her glasses. The case is being heard concerning divorce and division of property. Plaintiff, Nadezhda Vasilyevna. Defendant, Andrei Nikolaevich. A counterclaim for division of the dacha plot and compensation for moral damages. Viktor Pavlovich stood first. His voice was well-trained and confident. He spoke of Nadezhda as a cruel woman who had driven her husband to infidelity with her coldness and indifference, that she had set dangerous traps at the dacha with the intention of injuring her husband's relatives, that she had intentionally caused grievous bodily harm to Konstantin Nikolaevich, the defendant's brother, that the dacha had been purchased with the family's money and should be divided equally. Nadezhda listened and looked at Andrei. He sat with his head bowed, never once raising his eyes. For 30 years, she had fallen asleep next to this man. For 30 years, she had cooked his breakfasts, washed his shirts, and tolerated his mother. During this time, he had merely waited for her to pass away. The first witness was called, Tamara's neighbor, the plump lady in the headscarf. Standing, she pressed her hands to her chest and spoke in a honeyed voice. "Nadezhda Vasilyevna," she said, "told me she would have poisoned them all. She said it like that. Poisoned. I heard it myself." Dina stood up. "When was this? Where exactly? Under what circumstances?" she asked. The neighbor hesitated. "Well, it was a long time ago in Tamara Sergeyevna's kitchen, drinking tea." Dina nodded. "Who else witnessed this conversation?" The neighbor glanced at Tamara, then at the judge. "Yes, there were both of us." Dina smiled. "So the only eyewitness to your words is Tamara Sergeyevna herself, the defendant's mother, and, therefore, an interested party." The judge wrote something down in her notebook. The neighbor sat down, her face flushed with embarrassment. They presented Kostya's medical report. Partial damage to the cornea of the right eye. The prognosis is favorable, provided the prescribed treatment regimen is followed. Dina asked to read the doctor's note. The patient refused the proposed procedures, did not comply with the treatment regimen, and consumed alcohol during the therapy period. Kostya jerked on the bench. Lena put her hand on his shoulder. Then Marina spoke. Standing up, she straightened her skirt and spoke in a quiet but confident voice. 3 years of relationship, a promise to divorce and start a new life. 200,000 rubles supposedly spent on roof repairs that never happened. Photographs of the dacha he presented as his own. Correspondence in which he called his wife an old fool and swore eternal love. Andrei turned pale. Tamara jumped up. "This woman, she's lying. You were the one who was messing with him. You were the one who was giving him the money." The judge slammed her gavel. "One more statement like that, and I'll remove you from the courtroom." Tamara sat down, but her lips continued to move silently. Nadezhda asked to speak. Standing, she took a tablet from her bag and approached the judge's table. "I'd like to present the video recordings made at my dacha. The legality of the camera's installation is confirmed by a contract with a security company." The judge nodded. An image of a kitchen with a red polka dot oilcloth appeared on the screen. Tamara stood by the window, talking on the phone. Silence fell over the courtroom. Even the choir members stopped whispering. Nadezhda switched the recording. Kostya was now on the screen. Drunk, bottle in hand, he sat on the veranda and spoke into the camera, unaware he was being filmed. "When the old woman dies, the dacha will be ours. Andreyuka promised me half the plot. I'll build a bathhouse there and brew beer." Kostya tore off his sunglasses. His eyes were red and bloodshot, but they saw perfectly. "It's a montage!" he screamed. "She faked the whole thing!" The judge slammed the gavel again. Dina presented the documents, a certificate of ownership of the dacha, issued by the trade union in 1987, receipts for building materials for 30 years, all in Nadezhda's name, bank statements confirming that Andrei hadn't invested a penny in the dacha, a contract for a security system, a photograph of the safe door with a security warning, a police report about a break-in at the dacha. The judge reviewed the documents, then glanced at Andrei, Tamara, and Kostya in the front row, announcing a break for deliberation. She left. A commotion erupted in the courtroom. Tamara clutched her heart and sank onto a bench. Lena screamed for an ambulance. Someone ran for water. Andrei darted between his mother and the door, unsure what to do. Nadezhda remained seated. She watched the commotion around her mother-in-law without feeling anything. No pity, no malice, only fatigue and a strange feeling of emptiness, as if something heavy had finally fallen from her shoulders. Kostya took advantage of the commotion. He approached Nadezhda and leaned close to her ear. His eyes were angry, sober, completely unlike the eyes of a man going blind. "This isn't the end," he whispered. "You'll regret it. I'll find a way." Nadezhda looked at him calmly. You've already found and taken pepper spray to the face. Want to try again? Kostya recoiled. Paramedics appeared at the door with a stretcher. Tamara was taken away. The judge returned 40 minutes later. By then, the courtroom was half empty. Tamara had been taken away by ambulance. Lena followed. The choir singers dispersed without waiting for the outcome. Only Andrei, Kostya, Viktor Pavlovich, and a few curious onlookers who had no need to rush remained. The marriage is dissolved, the judge read monotonously without looking up from the papers. The dacha plot at such and such address remains in the courtroom as premarital property. The defendant's claim for division of property is dismissed. Konstantin Nikolaevich's claim for compensation for moral damages is dismissed due to unlawful entry onto someone else's property. The plaintiff's counterclaim is partially satisfied. The defendant and his relatives are obligated to pay damages for the break-in in the amount of... Nadezhda stopped listening to the figures. She looked at Andrei, who sat hunched over, rubbing his face with his hands. 30 years. 30 years she woke up next to this man, cooked him breakfast, washed his shirts. 30 years she endured his mother, his silence, his indifference. And all this time he waited for her to pass away. Andrei jumped to his feet as soon as the judge finished. He rushed to the door, then returned, grabbing Nadezhda's hand. "You killed my mother." His voice was hoarse and breaking. "You'll pay for this, do you hear me?" The guard stepped toward them, but Nadezhda shook her head. "Don't." She calmly pulled her hand free and looked her ex-husband in the eyes. "Your mother is alive, but our marriage is not. Go to her, Andrei. You have nowhere else to go." He left. The guard escorted him to the exit, just in case. Kostya slipped out after him, not even glancing at Nadezhda. Viktor Pavlovich gathered the papers into his briefcase and left silently, the stony face of a loser. Marina approached when the courtroom was completely empty. She said nothing, simply hugged them. The two women stood in the middle of the empty courtroom, and Nadezhda suddenly felt something inside her letting go. Not joy, no, something else. Relief, perhaps, or simply the end of a long, debilitating pain. 2 weeks later, she came to the dacha for the last time. The buyer from Moscow had already paid a deposit. The paperwork was ready. Nadezhda walked around the property, saying goodbye. "This is where I planted the first apple tree back in 1988. This is where I built the veranda, hauling boards after 24-hour shifts. This is where Tamara sat and commanded, 'It's crooked, redo it.'" Neighbor Liuda came out to the fence. She had aged over the past month. She had become haggard. "Nadia, forgive me," her voice trembled. "I told you about that painted one, and you've been through so much. I didn't know it would turn out like this." Nadezhda came over and hugged her through the fence. "You saved my life, Liuda. Without you, I would have died a fool. I would think that I have a good husband and a kind mother-in-law." She dug up a small 2-year-old apple tree sapling, planted last spring. She carefully wrapped the roots in a wet cloth and placed it in a bucket. She would plant this apple tree in a new place. It was the only thing she would take with her from her past life. A small whitewashed house by the sea was quickly found, with blue shutters and a tiny veranda. The village was inhabited mainly by elderly people and summer residents. No one knew her story. No one whispered behind her back. Nadezhda had drawn up papers in her niece Katya's name, granting her lifelong residence rights so that no one could ever take the house away from her again. Marina called the day before she was to leave. She, too, was leaving to join her sister in another city to start anew. They met at the same cafe on Pushkinskaya, where it all began. "You know, Nadezhda Vasilievna, I loved him." Marina twirled a cup of cold tea in her hands. "I truly loved him, but he doesn't know how to love anyone. Not me, not you, not Olya, only himself." Nadezhda nodded. "I loved too once, 30 years ago, and then I just got used to it. I thought that's how it was supposed to be, that love was about enduring." Marina looked up. And now, Nadezhda. Now I know that love is about not having to endure. That evening, Andrei called. His voice was dull, lifeless. "Mother's in the hospital," he said. "Kostyan filed a lawsuit against me. He says I dragged him into this mess with the dacha. Now he's crippled because of me. Lena isn't talking to me. My mistress ran away when she found out I have nothing." A pause. "I'm alone, Nadia. All alone." Nadezhda listened and waited. She knew what was about to happen. "Are you happy?" he asked. She paused for a few seconds, choosing her words. "I've been unhappy for 30 years, Andrei. Every day, every night. Now I'll be happy for 30 years. Goodbye." She hung up and turned off the phone. Then she turned it on again. There was one more visit she had to make. Kostya was lying alone in the ward. His wife had left, taken the children. She said she wouldn't live with a man who stole from his relatives and lied in court about being blind. His ward mates asked to be transferred to another ward. They didn't want to lie next to someone like that. Nadezhda entered without knocking. Kostya turned his head, saw her, and jerked, as if he wanted to get up. Then he realized there was nowhere to run, and he fell silent. She went to the nightstand and put down the photograph, the very one from the dacha. Kostya, drunk with a bottle in his hand, was talking into the camera. On the back was a note in her handwriting. He took the photograph, turned it over, and read it. He looked at Nadezhda with his good eye. The other was still swollen, but his vision was fine. "You're a witch," he whispered. Nadezhda shook her head. "No, I'm a nurse. We know how to wait and observe. 30 years of practice." She left without looking back. Mornings in the little house by the sea began with sunrise. Nadezhda stood on the veranda with a cup of tea and watched the sun rise from the water. Nearby, in the skating rink, a green apple tree sapling had taken root and put out new leaves. In a couple of years, it would bear its first fruit. The phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Nadezhda didn't answer. She no longer answered unfamiliar numbers. A message arrived. "Mom, it's me, your daughter. Dad gave out your number. I want to meet you." The cup slipped from her fingers and shattered on the wooden floor of the veranda. Nadezhda stood and stared at the screen, unable to move. 35 years ago, before Andrei, before the clinic, before everything, she had given birth to a girl. She was 19, alone in a strange city, without money, without support. She gave the child up for adoption and never told anyone about it. Not even her sister, not even Zina. No one. She looked at the sea, then at the phone, then at the sea again. Seagulls screamed over the water. The sun rose higher and higher. The day promised to be warm. Nadezhda slowly typed out a reply. "Come," she sent. She sat down on the veranda steps right in a puddle of spilled tea and cried for the first time in many months. Not from pain, not from resentment, but from something else, something she didn't yet know the name for, perhaps from hope. The very hope she'd carried in her name her entire life, but had long since stopped believing in. The apple tree in the rink rustled its young leaves. Ahead lay the sea, a new home, and the daughter she'd lost 35 years ago. Ahead lay life, real life, her own, finally.